Cinderella's Hard Life. Once upon a time, there was a sweet and gentle girl named Cinderella. She lived with her cruel stepmother and two mean stepsisters who made her do all the housework. While they wore fine clothes and went to parties, Cinderella wore old rags and was treated like a servant. Even though her life was hard, Cinderella remained kind and hopeful, making friends with the little mice and birds that lived in the house. The king's plough. Far away in the royal palace, the king was worried about his son, the prince, who had not yet found a bride. The king decided to hold a grand ballet and invited all the young women in the kingdom. He hoped that the prince would meet his true love at the ballet. When the invitation arrived at Cinderella's house, her stepsisters were excited, but they laughed at Cinderella when she dreamed of going to the ballet too. Preparing for the ballet. Cinderella's stepmother agreed that she could go to the ballet, but only if she finished all her chores and found something to wear. Cinderella worked hard all day doing extra chores given to her by her stepmother and stepsisters. Meanwhile, her animal friends, J.Q. and Gus, found an old dress of her mother's and decided to help. They sewed and fixed the dress using scraps and ribbons thrown away by the stepsisters. When Cinderella saw the dress, she was overjoyed. The cruel trick. Just as Cinderella was about to leave for the ballet, her stepsisters noticed she was wearing things they had discarded. In a fit of jealousy, they tore her dress apart, leaving her in rags again. Cinderella was heartbroken and ran to the garden crying. She felt like all her dreams were ruined. The Fairy Godmother. In the stillness of the night, beneath the twinkling stars, Cinderella found herself alone in the garden. The night air was cool, and the soft glow of the moon cast long shadows over the flowers, which seemed to droop in sympathy with her sorrow. Overcome with despair, Cinderella could no longer hold back her tears. She wept quietly, her tears glistening like tiny paws as they fell onto the soft earth beneath her. Each tear seemed to carry with it all the pain and heartache she had endured under the cruel treatment of her stepmother and stepsisters. As the tears continued to flow, something extraordinary began to happen. The garden, once so dark and quiet, started to glow with a gentle golden light. This light grew brighter and brighter until, in a brilliant flash of magic, Cinderella's fairy godmother appeared before her. She was a figure of grace and kindness, her appearance bringing warmth to the cold night. Dressed in flowing robes that shimmered like the stars above, the fairy godmother's presence was both comforting and awe-inspiring. Seeing Cinderella's tear-streaked face, the fairy godmother approached her with a tender smile. "My dear Cinderella," she said, her voice as soft and soothing as a lullaby. "Why do you cry?" With a heavy heart, Cinderella explained her situation, the cruelty she faced daily, the broken dreams she held close, and the deep sadness she felt at being unable to attend the grand ballet, a dream she had cherished for so long. The fairy godmother listened intently, her heart aching for the gentle, kind-hearted girl before her. Determined to bring joy back into Cinderella's life, she decided to help her in a way that only she could. "You shall go to the ballet, my dear," she declared, her eyes twinkling with a mischievous sparkle. With a graceful wave of her magic wand, the fairy godmother set to work. The first transformation was nothing short of miraculous. With a flick of her wand, a large plum pumpkin that had been growing near the edge of the garden suddenly began to swell and grow. The humble pumpkin had been transformed into a vehicle fit for a princess. Next, the fairy godmother turned her attention to a group of small mice that had been scurrying about in the garden. With another wave of her wand, the mice began to grow, their bodies elongating and their fur becoming sleek and glossy. In moments, they had transformed into a team of magnificent horses, their eyes bright and eager, ready to put the carriage on its journey. Finally, the fairy godmother looked at Cinderella herself. The poor girl stood in her torn and tattered dress, the remnants of which were barely holding together. With a gentle swish of her wand, the fairy godmother, worked her most beautiful magic yet. Cinderella's old, ragged dress began to shimmer and glow, the fabric swirling around her like a gentle breeze. In an instant, it was transformed into an exquisite ballet gown, delicate and elegant, shimmering with every movement. The gown was a masterpiece, adorned with intricate patterns that sparkled like diamonds in the moonlight. As a finishing touch, the fairy godmother conjured a pair of delicate glass slippers. These were no ordinary shoes. They were as light as air and as transparent as crystal. Catching the light with every step Cinderella took, the slippers completed her transformation, making her look every bit the princess she truly was inside. Before sending her off, the fairy godmother gently took Cinderella's hand and gave her a final, important warning. "Remember, my dear," she said softly, "this magic will only last until the stroke of midnight. When the clock strikes 12, everything will return to its original form. The carriage will become a pumpkin once more, the horses will be mice, and your beautiful gown will turn back into rags." Cinderella nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. With a final, loving smile, the fairy godmother sent Cinderella after the ballet, her heart filled with hope, joy, and a little bit of nervousness. For the first time in a long while, Cinderella felt that her dreams were within reach, if only for a few magical hours. The Grand Ballet. Cinderella arrived at the Grand Ballet in her magical carriage, and as she stepped out, it was as if time itself paused to admire her beauty. The entrance to the palace was adorned with glittering chandeliers and towering marble columns, all illuminated by the soft glow of hundreds of candles. As she walked gracefully up the steps, her shimmering gown caught the light, and her glass slippers sparkled with every step, creating a mesmerizing display that left everyone in awe. As soon as Cinderella entered the Grand Ballet room, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to her, and whispers of admiration spread like wildfire through the gathering. Who was this mysterious beauty who had graced them with her presence? Her elegance, grace, and undeniable beauty captivated everyone in the room, but none more so than the prince himself. The prince, who had been standing near the throne, was immediately struck by Cinderella's radiant charm. Her presence was like a beacon of light in the ballroom, and he found himself drawn to her as if by some irresistible force. Without a moment's hesitation, he approached her, his heart beating faster with each step. Bowing low, he extended his hand and asked her, "May I have this dance?" Cinderella, taken aback by the prince's attention, felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of surprise and excitement. She nodded shyly, placing her delicate hand in his, and together they moved to the center of the ballroom. As the music began to play, they danced together, gliding across the floor as if they had known each other forever. The prince was completely entranced by her, and Cinderella, for the first time in her life, felt truly happy and cherished. The evening passed like a beautiful dream. Cinderella and the prince were inseparable, dancing and talking as though no one else existed. They shared laughter, secrets, and moments of silent understanding that spoke more than words ever could. The other guests watched with envy and admiration as the prince devoted all his attention to the mysterious young woman who had so effortlessly captured his heart. Cinderella was so lost in the magic of the evening that she forgot all about the fairy godmother's warning. Time seemed to stand still as she danced in the prince's arms, her heart light with joy. But as the night wore on, the clock in the grand hall began to chime, each tolling bell echoing through the palace. It was midnight. Suddenly, reality crashed back into Cinderella's mind. The fairy godmother's warning rang in her ears, and panic set in. She knew that if she didn't leave immediately, her beautiful gown would turn back into rags, and her grand carriage would become nothing more than a humble pumpkin. Without a word, she pulled away from the prince and dashed out of the ballroom, her heart pounding with fear and regret. The prince called after her, desperate to know who she was and why she was leaving so suddenly. But Cinderella didn't stop. She raced down the grand staircase, her glass slippers clinking against the marble steps, her gown billowing behind her. In her haste, one of her glass slippers slipped off her foot and tumbled down the stairs, but she didn't have time to retrieve it. The clock continued to strike, each chime reminding her that the magic was about to end. Cinderella barely made it to her carriage as the 12th chime echoed through the night. As the final bell tolled, the magic began to fade. The grand carriage shrank back into a pumpkin. The horses returned to their original forms as mice, and her exquisite gown transformed back into the tattered rags she had worn before. She found herself standing in the middle of the road, alone and barefoot, with only the single glass slipper in her hand as a reminder of the magical night she had just experienced. Breathless and filled with a mix of emotions, Cinderella hurried back home, her heart still racing from the excitement and fear of the evening. Little did she know that the glass slipper she had left behind would soon become the key to changing her life forever. The prince's search. The next day, the prince was determined to find the girl he danced with. He sent out a royal decree that every maiden in the kingdom must try on the glass slipper, and he would marry the one whose foot it fit. The Grand Duke took the slipper to every house, but it didn't fit anyone. When he arrived at Cinderella's house, her stepmother locked her in the attic, hoping to keep her hidden the fitting of the glass slipper. The day had arrived when the Prince's Grand Duke, tasked with finding the mysterious girl from the ballet, visited every house in the kingdom with the glass slipper that Cinderella had left behind. The news had spread like wildfire. Whoever could fit into the delicate slipper would be the prince's bride. Excitement and anticipation buzzed through the air as the Grand Duke and his entourage made their way through the village, stopping at each house to let the women try on the slipper. At Cinderella's home, her stepmother and stepsisters were in a frenzy. They had spent hours preparing, each sister convinced that she was the one destined to marry the prince. They preened and pampered themselves, desperate to make a good impression. Cinderella, on the other hand, was locked away in the attic, far from the excitement and hope that filled the house. Her stepmother had ensured that Cinderella would have no chance to try on the slipper, believing that her daughters were the only worthy candidates. The Grand Duke finally arrived at Cinderella's home, his servants carrying the precious glass slipper on a velvet cushion. Her stepsisters eagerly pushed forward, each one determined to prove that the slipper belonged to her. The first sister, with trembling hands, attempted to slide her foot into the delicate shoe, but it was no use. Her foot was too large, and no amount of pushing or squeezing could make it fit. The second sister, equally desperate, fared no better. The slipper simply wasn't meant for them. As the Grand Duke prepared to leave, a look of disappointment and frustration crossed his face. He had tried the slipper on so many feet, yet none had matched. He turned to go, when suddenly the sound of footsteps echoed down the staircase. It was Cinderella. Her animal friends who had overheard the Grand Duke's arrival had worked together to free her from the attic. The birds had pecked at the lock, while the mice squeezed through the keyhole and pushed the latch open. With their help, Cinderella had been able to escape just in time. Breathless and determined, Cinderella rushed down the stairs, her heart pounding with both hope and fear. "Please wait," she called out. The Grand Duke turned in surprise, as did her stepmother and stepsisters, their faces twisted in shock and anger. Cinderella approached the Grand Duke and asked, in a voice steady with determination, "May I try on the slipper?" Her stepmother, realizing what was about to happen, tried to intervene. She claimed that Cinderella was just a servant girl and not worthy of such an honor. In a last-ditch effort to stop her, she even attempted to trip Cinderella as she stepped forward. But Cinderella was undeterred. She calmly stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the Grand Duke's as he signaled for the servant to present the slipper. With a deep breath, Cinderella gently slipped her foot into the glass slipper. The room fell silent as everyone held their breath. To no one's surprise but her stepmother's, the slipper fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her because it had been. The Grand Duke's eyes widened in amazement. "It's a perfect fit," he exclaimed, his voice filled with joy and relief. Cinderella smiled, her heart swelling with happiness. But she wasn't finished yet. From behind her, she produced the other glass slipper, the one she had kept as a reminder of that magical night at the ballet. She held it up for all to see, confirming beyond any doubt that she was the mysterious girl who had danced with the prince. Her stepmother and stepsisters were speechless, their faces a mix of disbelief and jealousy. They had tried so hard to keep Cinderella down, yet here she was, proving that she was the one destined for the prince. The Grand Duke, overjoyed, bowed deeply to Cinderella. "You are the one the prince has been searching for," he said with a smile. "Please, come with me to the palace." Cinderella's heart soared as she realized that all the dreams she had kept locked away for so long were finally coming true. She had overcome every obstacle and now stood at the threshold of a new life, one filled with love, happiness, and the promise of a bright future, happily ever after. Cinderella was taken to the palace, where she reunited with the prince. They were married in a grand ceremony, and Cinderella's kindness and courage were rewarded with a life of happiness. The prince and Cinderella lived happily ever after, and the kingdom rejoiced at their love story.